Just as jobs are returning, the EPA calling for a slew of new regulations to fight global warming. Now, some business groups warning the rules would send unemployment skyrocketing and your electric bills soaring. Will they? Hi, everyone. I'm Brenda Butner. This is Bulls and Bears. And here they are, the Bulls and Bears this week. Gary V. Smith, Tracy Burns, Jonas Max Ferris, John Layfield, along with Chuck Rocha. Welcome to everybody. Okay, so Gary V., if the EPA gets its way, will it be lights out for the job market?
I think so, Brenda. I don't see how it can't. There's a couple facts to keep in mind. One, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce has already studied, and they said it's going to cost about 225,000 jobs. Now, even if you believe that the Chamber of Commerce is somehow biased, I think the best piece of data to look at is what happened with the Clean Air Act. You know, Brenda, as you recall from when you and I were growing up, this was passed in 1970 with some various amendments. Well, it was studied in 2002, and just through 1987, it cost about 600,000 jobs. Then there was another study done in 2011, said the cost was over $65 billion just for the amendments that they put on in 1990. Brenda, whatever passed here, it doesn't matter if you're for, the environment, against. The point is it going to cost jobs? Unequivocally, yes.
Chuck, what do you think? Oftentimes businesses say when you throw regulations at them, you add uncertainty, you make them not want to hire people and sometimes fire.
Let's be clear, when you throw regulation to business, that just means they got to spend a little bit of money, and that's going to come out of daddy's pocket, so they want to make sure that there's nobody regulating nothing. But we've got a good case study here. There's 9 northeastern states who came together and implemented their own cap-and-trade program, and since 2009, they've reduced emissions 27% and saw economic growth over 9.6%. So this can be done, and if those renewable jobs are made in America, and we're making windmills and solar panels here and putting Americans to work, I can see this being a success.
Well, Tracy, Chuck talks about daddy paying for some of these regulations, but in fact, many of these businesses are small businesses, and more regulations, what do they mean to them?
It means they potentially have to raise the cost of the goods they're selling, and that means they're just going to pass it on to you and I. Your electricity bill is going to go up at home. It's going to go up at the small business office as well, which means, again, they're going to pass it on. Look, the biggest jobs that are going to be lost are the Senate seats in the states of Kentucky, West Virginia, Indiana, North Dakota. Those guys all have their jobs on the line. They will lose dramatically if something like this goes through because those are coal-producing states. Their jobs are pretty much at risk, too.
But, Jonas, if one industry gives way perhaps to another, some jobs could be created.
Right, because job creation isn't the goal. I mean, that isn't, if you target that, you'll do some stupid stuff. I mean, you can mandate that you have to have 2 drivers for every taxi you're going to create jobs. It doesn't mean it's good policy. This particular policy will create jobs because essentially what they're doing is phasing out coal-fired power plants, right? So they're going to have to accelerate the building of nuclear and gas power plants, right? Building a new plant is expensive. It's going to raise our prices. But isn't that going to use more labor than operating an old, dirty coal plant? I'm not saying it's good policy, but from a job-creating point of view, how would that not create jobs? We have to get rid of all the old, dirty coal-fired plants and all those not high-capacity jobs. As far as the environment, look, any environmental policy is going to probably hurt the economy. That's not what it's trying to do. We have cleaner air because of the Clean Air Act. You know, it probably raised costs to not dump stuff in rivers, but that's not why we added that rule that you can't do that.
Okay, John, you buying all this?
No, I'm not buying all this. Remember cellulosic ethanol? We had a mandate for cellulosic ethanol, and oil companies have been paying millions of dollars in fines because they don't use a fuel that is not commercially available. I mean, this is the same thing. The administration here just says to the states, hey, reduce your emissions by 30% by a certain date. How are we going to do that? I don't know. Just you states figure it out. Renewable energy does create jobs, but they're talking about just punishing coal plants is what they're talking about punishing. And remember, the resurgence in the United States in manufacturing is because the United States has about 13 cents a kilowatt hour for electricity. It's one of the lowest in the world. You start adding to that, it's going to cost jobs across the board in many different sectors.
And Chuck, Tracy brought up the point of electricity bills soaring. That's going to hit the poorest people hardest? And I know you're a big champion of them.
I think American business is smarter than this. I think we put regulation on cars, and I think they made cars more efficient. I think 3 years ago we started limiting mercury. Now the drinking water is better. There's less asthma cases, and business made it more efficient to do what they were already doing. And I think that the American entrepreneur is smart enough to know that we can't keep pumping black stuff into the air and keep our air clean and our water clean.
Okay, Gary B.
Well, let's go back to the car example. When they put the regulations on cars, we were forced, Detroit, to sell cars that could not compete with the Japanese. And in fact, that led to the great Japanese invasion of Toyota, Honda. And it wasn't until the U.S. consumer went back to the big, quote-unquote, gas-guzzling SUVs that we made very well, did some of those industries turn around. As for Jonas's point, I can understand if the windmills and the solar could all stand on their own. But as we phase out an industry that stands on its own and have to then do this forced move to solar and all this other jazz to produce energy that have to be subsidized, that's the problem. We have to pay taxes to subsidize all those industries that can stand on their own. So either way, it's going to be money out of our pocket, and we take money out of our pocket, that costs jobs.
But the rules that are being proposed don't actually focus on the soot, because at the end of the day, it's about the soot, right? We're talking about carbon dioxide emissions. We're talking about all this nonsense that's not getting to the crux of it all. So you're passing rules that aren't even going to help. And if you don't get the world on board, a cool breeze will blow from China all the way over to us, and no matter what we're doing here at home, we are still affected by what's going on in China, India, all these countries that just don't give a darn right now.
And Chuck, that's a good point.
Yeah, and if we don't lead by example, we'll never be able to go to a negotiation and go, we need y'all to cut y'all's emissions. When they'll look right at us and go, what about it, big boy? You ain't even cut your own emissions. Your politicians want to make sure that they keep all of their jobs. Don't try to sacrifice us for the good of your politicians.
John?
Chuck, I agree with you on this. Look, every megawatt of renewable energy creates about 20 jobs. But we're not talking about creating jobs. We're not talking about creating infrastructure where wind farms in West Texas aren't a bottleneck, where solar farms in Southwest Arizona are in a bottleneck anymore. We're talking simply about punishing fossil fuels. That's what this is all about. There is no plan here. It's just, hey, reduce them by 30%. This is some pie-in-the-sky dream that they have, and there is no strategy going forward. That's left up to somebody else, and that's just typical of politics and this administration right now.
And you could say that about the CAF standards. I mean, it's the same basic policy where they're decreeing that Detroit has to hit, and foreign car companies, these higher standards of emissions. The consumer doesn't have to pay for it with high gas taxes, and then they are going to do it. I mean, it's going to cost them money, but they're going to make cars that get more miles per gallon. So it's not like it's impossible for private industry to follow the mandate. I'm not saying it's good policy, but they'll ultimately hit it. And as far as the foreign thing, look, Toyota, they made cars in the 70s that didn't need catalytic converters to meet our emission rules. That was our disadvantage for bad engineering. You can't blame the emission rules on that. Everybody had to make the emission levels, foreign and domestic cars. We just are bad engineers back then.
Tracy, you want to have a last word?
I mean, I think at the end of the day, we're killing an industry for no reason whatsoever. The costs are going to be passed on down to us. And I think the worst is that they're doing this by executive order. Let them vote. I mean, geez, they vote on everything else under the sun. Let them at least vote and do this right, as opposed to the EPA and the president making all of the rules.
Right, and John, you made a good point. They're basically just passing this along to the states. It's not passing along to private industry. The states now are going to make the decision about what happens and how they do this.
Yeah, they have absolutely no strategy whatsoever. If I were the president, I would tell the EPA, rule on fracking right now, good, bad, indifferent. That would create enough jobs in the Monterey Shell in California alone to reduce their deficit. This is some type of pie-in-the-sky dream. It's a landmark legislation that the president wants to pass so that he can say something in his retirement that he did in his second term.
Okay. All right. Thanks, guys.